All right, all right. What's up? What's up, Jolene? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm just trying to get this little. I'm good. I'm trying to get this little comment in right quick before we start. But apparently we're live right now,
We
so
are.
I'm great. How are you doing?
I am doing okay. It's been quite the whirlwind.
Hmm.
But all things considered, boy is okay. Before we get started, I wanted to just keep my family in prayer. For those of you that don't know, my wife is from Honduras. If you didn't know, now you know. And she lost her uncle in a plane crash. And so, Aurelio Martinez, the only thing I can say is rest in power and peace be the journey. And you lived an amazing life. You did some phenomenal things. You played some beautiful music. And on top of that, you inspired many. So thank you for also being a part of my wife's life and inspiring her. I appreciate you. And the world will definitely miss you. So that's what's been going on in my world. That just happened as of last night. So it's just been a lot to take in. But here we are. Here we are.
Yeah.
So yes. All right. So Jolene, we got a lot to get into though today.
We do. This is the first time ever, Mark. The first time.
We're gonna, in the words of Anthony Chicumbo, we're gonna be talking about the crypto.
The first time ever. You already know how I feel about. Well, maybe you don't know how I feel about crypto.
We're gonna find out. Like this is if it's FAFO season, we're definitely gonna find out as it pertains to crypto when it comes to Jolene GC. But first things first. What's good, everybody? I'm Mark Monroe, accompanied by my wonderful co-host, co-producer, and co-creator in all things galactic. Wow. Give it up for none other than the wonderful.
It's Jolene GC and the place to be. And the GC stands for Get Crypto. It's like, I'm just kidding. It
doesn't. Okay. All right.
I joke.
Not an endorsement.
No.
All right. So but yeah, we got a lot to unpack today. We got an amazing guest that's joining us. We got the Deal Esquire that's joining us today. So you may have seen him in different spaces. You may see him, around. You probably, if you were at the summit, you actually may have met him. He's a phenomenal brother. He has an amazing story. Definitely, for the cause and is definitely about it. I can't wait to bring him to the stage and for him to just unload a wealth of just knowledge on the cousins. So y'all ready? Because because when we bring people to the Come Up series, we bring vetted people, we bring people in whom which that are ultimately about it, movers and shakers amongst industry. So this is none other. So prepare yourselves, buckle in. We got ourselves a titan, y'all. So should we bring him to the stage? Should we bring him to the stage, Jolene?
I think so.
Okay, you ready? You ready? Yeah. You ready? All right, bet. All right, so then coming to the stage, we got Mr. Corey Harris Esquire. Confetti. What's good, brother?
Well, thank you.
All right.
Here.
Go ahead. What'd you say, Jolene?
I said we're so happy to have him here.
Of
Thank
course.
you. I'm happy to be here. Happy to be seen.
This has been a long road coming. So, for example, Corey was supposed to come on about a year ago, but things were happening, deals were being made and everything else. Watch you're gonna find out as he starts telling more of his story. You're gonna be like, oh, okay, all right. So now we understand the reason why. But you know what? You are where you're supposed to be. Perfect timing for today's episode. So let's just get into it because we ain't got time to waste, brother. We ain't got time to waste because your time is very precious. So first things first, for the people that don't know, that need to know, tell them who you is and who you be, Corey.
Well, Corey Harris. I'm many things. I'm an attorney. I'm also an expat. I'm a business advisor. I'm a problem solver. So I would summarize it that way.
Bet. Okay, so but you have a very interesting story as it pertains to how is it that you actually came into Like for example, describe your first day as a lawyer. Like,
Okay. Yeah. So you may have seen that. So to date myself a bit, I did a JD and an MBA. So I did both, trying to be an overachiever. And that program is a 4-year program. My 4th year, my graduation and my day starting work. So I started work on September 15th, 2008, which was the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed, which was the famous investment bank for folks who may not know. And to add to that, I started in New York City on September 15th, 2008. And my firm at the time was a block away from Lehman Brothers. So I literally, on the morning of Lehman Brothers going bankrupt, they had all the initial associates, they do the new attorney orientation sort of things, like you start a job, and they had us all staying at a hotel a block from the law firm. And it just so happened that in between the hotel and the law firm was the Lehman Brothers building. And so that morning I'm walking, strolling along, not really knowing fully what's going on. And I notice, the funny thing was, the news channel 6, the different things you see on, they had pulled the TV van on the curbs where security normally is. And I knew something was off because, again, this is like 8:15 in the morning.
mm-hmm.
And the next thing I observed was folks in their mid-30s to 40s with big banker's boxes coming out, and you could see the boxes, but then I looked closer and there were vodka bottles, whiskey bottles, all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, this is strange. And then the next thing I remember specifically, and I'm like 6 feet away from these people. This is real time. This isn't blocks away. So I'm Lehman Brothers on the left side of the street, and I'm on the right side of the street looking straight at this. And then you can see the camera folks start pushing the cameras in front of their face, to get their comment. I didn't know at the time, but they were saying, like, can we get your comment on what's going on? And so fast forward, I get to the office and the orientation, and I knew something was off, but we get in the orientation and everything is proceeding normally. And so this is all happening real time. There's about 100 of us in a big ballroom for our orientation. And about halfway through the chairman of the firm's welcome speech, he gets a tap on the shoulder and he tells us he has to step away because Lehman Brothers has gone bankrupt. And so I literally found out real time. And then all the rest of the things that happened after that was kind of its own. We could, that's a whole rabbit hole right there. But it was a very interesting time to be kind of fresh out of law school on your first day at work.
Wow. Okay. So, all right. So let's fast forward from there. So, like, because it says managing partner of your own law firm. So, like,
that's
how
right.
do we get from there to here now?
So that's a journey.
You're taking us on a field trip, so I'm gonna walk with you. So
okay, so I mean, it's a journey, and I would say it's God's grace. I can't take credit for anything that has happened in my life. I will say I've tried to do my best, but as we all know, we do our best, but there are things that are out of our control. So in my case, what happened was I finished school, worked at a law firm. After a few years, survived that whole kind of crisis era. Yep. I'd gone in-house and I thought, hey, in-house refers to being in-house counsel. So oftentimes people think, oh, I'm in-house counsel. It's going to be, 9 to 5. I'm going to be able to have basically the same money and a better lifestyle. Not the case at all. And so in that case, I basically was making half the money working the same hours, which is about 100 hours a week, or sometimes more. And so I started kind of trying to figure out what might be next. It was a great experience, but it wasn't kind of what I had in my mental plan at graduation day sort of things. And so what I did at that point was I started trying to look around to figure out what I might do next. And I ended up being accepted into Berkeley Law, UC Berkeley over in the Bay Area. I was planning to move. I lived in Boston at the time. I was planning to move back down to the Mid-Atlantic where I'm from. And right around that same time, like within a week of potentially taking a job at a firm in the Mid-Atlantic, I actually got accepted into Berkeley. And so I kind of thought about it because at the time I already had degrees and I was like, well, should I really go back to school? I had a bunch of soul searching about it. And I decided to do the orientation, see how the process might be, because up to that point, I'd only lived on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And so when I went out there, I just fell in love with the campus, the professors, the staff, the faculty. Is very different on the West Coast than it is in the Northeast. And so the culture of the school and everything really resonated with me. So I decided to go ahead and do that, kind of stepping on faith again. And once I did that, it was really a life-changing experience in a lot of different ways. The people I met, I started to realize that living on the East Coast and going to school in the Northeast is its own reality. But if you live and go to school in the Bay Area or even anywhere else in America, you may be living a very different reality that you just aren't aware of. And in my case specifically, so I lived in Boston where, you know, it's winter pretty much through Labor Day. And the winter is basically late September through around Labor Day, depending on the year. And I get out to Berkeley and it was
70 degrees,
75 degrees, sunshine for almost 365 days. So for people who know the Bay Area know that San Francisco can be cloudy and rainy, but Berkeley can have a whole different weather pattern. And so I was just shocked. And I was just like, wow, this is why people, you know, really like the Bay. So I had a great experience there. Fast forward from that, I worked at a firm that had offices in the Bay Area and also in the DC area. Yeah. And during that process as an associate, I started having a lot of epiphanies about what it means to be a young associate, a person from a diverse background, you know, trying to kind of make their way in corporate America. And what I started to learn was that I met associates again from all around the world, some from Canada, some from New York, who were similar to me, transplanted because, you know, a wife had gotten a job or a wife was from California. And one of the things that I learned in talking to these associates, we were all the same class year. We all came out in 2008 or right around there, 2007, 8, 9, 10 during the great financial crisis. And what I started to learn was I thought that I was the only one catching hell as a young associate in these type of firms. And I realized it took from 2008 up until now, we're at about 2014, 15 timeframe when it dawned on me that no, folks were catching hell all across the US and having different experiences, but we didn't know each other. We weren't communicating. We weren't, you know, sharing these things. So that was a critical epiphany for me. And the next one was I had a very large, I won't say the name, a large company that everybody uses every single day. And they had a fund manager, which does venture capital, which we can get into. And oftentimes in the Bay Area, especially, tech companies will spin out or set up corporate venture capital firms. And they call them arms, and it's called corporate VC. And the reason they do that, let's say if you're, you know, Apple, Google, Facebook, Salesforce, etc., they are looking at ways they can find and identify the next company just like them because they started off as real founder-led tech startups. And so in this case, there was a particular client that I had pulled in. I'd gone through all the rigmarole as a kind of a mid-level associate. There's all sorts of things you have to do in a law firm and getting approvals and committees, etc. And I was told that, you know, I could get credit, meaning they would take it into consideration for promotions and raises and all that. But I was also told that I wouldn't be able to potentially share in any of the actual revenue, profits per partner is what they call it. And so at that point in my career, I had already been, you know, pitching clients, working on different committees, bringing in my own clients. I have a business background. I'm looking at the way firms are structured. You have to billable hours and actual hours aren't the same thing. So for example, you may have to bill 100 hours a month to meet 1,200 hours a year as a target. Currently, that hour requirement at most law firms is minimum 2,000 hours. It could be anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000, depending on the firm, to kind of keep your chair in the firm. Bill that many hours a year means you're working roughly 80 hours a week, and you can afford to take basically one day off, not every week, one day off once or twice a month to hit those hour targets. And so when I started doing the math in my head, I'm thinking, wait, I bring in this client. I've done these type of deals before. I know what the total revenue is. I know based on simple math, if I have to bill 2,000 hours a year and my billable rate is $600, $700, $800 an hour times 2,000. Well, you know how much money you're making the firm, and then you know how much money your paycheck says. And this
they're not adding up.
It's not adding up. It's funny math. And so I started having these thoughts like, wait, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And basically what happened is that process and the politics around that, it was, well, look, we'll let you potentially bring this in, but you won't be you won't really be the one getting credit for bringing this business in, this huge transaction.
Right.
And so the way I looked at it was, I can't say every firm is like this. I can't speak to things that maybe I wasn't aware of that could have been going on. But I thought, you know what would it be like if I could work for myself with the skills I have and not have a limiter, like in a car, you have that speedometer limiter. What if I could do things and not have a limiter over my ceiling of possibility? And that led to me basically taking about a year and a half. What I did was I stayed at the firm, but what I did was I moved from back in that time, 2016, 17 time, I moved from a $3,600 a month condo in the Embarcadero because I had to walk to work. I didn't have a car. I moved into a house with 3 roommates, not too far away in Nob Hill in San Francisco. And I basically saved for a year and a half and planned the business strategy of setting up the company, figuring out health insurance, all the things you'd have to figure out if you're a startup founder. Because the first question from an American perspective is, what am I going to do about healthcare? That's usually the first perspective. So I spent about a year and a half saving and then planning. And then I thought, you know what, let's just go for it. So then I decided I also wanted to try to do this with an international component, because if I'm setting up my own firm and I can control kind of where and how I live, I thought, well, hey, I've really been trying to spend more time abroad. And the way I tried to do it at that same firm I mentioned in 2008 and this other firm in the Bay and in DC, firms will have programs where they let you second or volunteer, as a paid employee in the other offices.
Yep.
But I kept running into the whole skepticism of me wanting to be in Asia or me wanting to be outside of the US. And so, because people don't fully understand my background. And so I kept running into no's, talking to the different partners in the home offices and going through all the rigmarole. And when I set up my own firm, I said, you know what, I'm just going to figure this out myself. And that's literally what I did. When I originally moved abroad, I went on a 6-month visa. And when I went on a 6-month visa, I was blessed enough to meet some folks from the Berkeley community who are abroad. And then once people locally started to figure out, well, like, wait, this guy has, venture capital and private equity and mergers and acquisitions and all this corporate law experience we can get into, and he's on the ground here, things kind of took off on their own. And so that's kind of how I, ended up where I am today. And I'll give God all the credit. I'll take 5% of it maybe, but I got to give him at least 95% because I couldn't have known. At the time I did this, just to paint the picture for everyone, when I did this, when I sold that, when I got rid of that lease and moved into that 3-bedroom with 3 people I didn't know in Nob Hill in the Bay Area, sold all my furniture and everything. We're talking 2016. And when I told my coworkers that I'm doing this, people are looking at me like, what are you talking about? And when I told my family, like, hey, I'm thinking of quitting my job, starting a business, starting a firm, figuring all the business side of that out. Oh, and I'm going to move to a foreign country and figure it out at the same time. Basically, what I got was, you're doing too much. And so, but I prayed about it and I planned. I'm a planner. I prayed about it and I planned. And I said, well, let's kind of split the difference. Let me try kind of a 6-month period here and see if I can get my legs under me, see if this is, you know, a place, an area, a region that I might like, and then I'll just evaluate from there. And that's what I did.
Corey,
So-
I have a question for you right quick. So back when you were at Berkeley, so when I went on a law school tour at Berkeley, I remember seeing the Black students with shirts that said like 1 of 12. Now, that meant that there were 12 law students across first year, second year, and third year. So by the
Yes.
time you got there, because that was like maybe 2002 when I went on that tour. So by the time you got there, how many Black law students were there?
I'd say there were more. So if I'm remembering, so let me paint the picture. So I went to 2 different schools. So I went to Boston College for my first law degree. The JD is what they
Mhm.
call it. The JD is your original law degree. You know, you come out of college, you work for a few years, you go to get a Juris Doctor. That's what JD stands for. So when I did the JD, I did that at Boston College, which is in Boston, and then of course you've got Harvard and Cambridge and the other schools in the BU, etc. That experience was 2004 to 2008. So then I was, just to give you a clear picture, I was in the Northeast. I'd never been to the Northeast. I'd never been north of the Mason-Dixon line in my life at that time, other than a small high school trip.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to Boston, there were, I believe, 3 or 4 African-American males in my class, my entering class. And the total might have been 10 men and women in the first year class. So, and then what they did was they would separate you into sections. So like sections of 60 people. So what that meant was it would be like me and one other guy, and then maybe 2 women in our section. And then depending on, you know, your luck of the draw, you might be the only person that kind of had your background in the other 2 sections. Fast forward 2014, when I'm at Berkeley, I'm doing what's called a Master's of Law, which is an LLM. And the benefit I had of that is I had the benefit of having 6 years or so of work experience, life experience, etc. And I'm in the Bay Area, totally different.
Mhm.
In that case, my year being in the LLM program, I was maybe one of a few folks who are quote unquote African American. And I say that because the LLM program is very international.
Yeah.
That there were folks from it was like the United Nations.
Mm-hmm.
I might have been one of 2, maybe African-American folks, but there were folks from all sorts of countries in Africa, Colombia, etc., China, all that. In the undergraduate, in the JD program, I used to go to our different affinity group law school meetings and things. And what I remember most was that there were more people in those rooms than I saw in my entire time on the East Coast. In my specific experience, I want to be very clear.
Wow.
So, and when I saw them, I mean, we would have our meetings in a, like our law student meetings, you know, let's say Black law students meeting would be in a classroom normally, and we would hold it in there, and it would be standing room only worth of people. So these classrooms will hold at least 30. So I would say it was at least 30, 35, and not everybody would show up for all the meetings. You know, folks were busy, but I noticed a drastic difference both in the culture of the institution, you know, East Coast versus West Coast, and then the type of students, drastic difference. And I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to kind of experience that, because most people don't, right? You go to one school and you kind of think this how it is. And I was able to see that, no, these schools are very different depending on your personalities and the school as an institution. And so that was another valuable lesson that I learned in that process.
How did that influence like what you do now? Like being, I guess it seemed like what I'm hearing is that it was a major culture shock. So like how does that influence how you go about doing what you do now, as far as when it comes to like culture and community? Like how important is that to you?
Well, what I've learned, you know, what I learned was, you know, I just try to be fearless. I try to do a couple of things. One, be fearless. Secondly, we all are living and walking our own path. So if I describe to you what I just described, most people, when I was in my JD program, they're like, why are you getting an MBA? You already are getting a JD. That seems like it's overkill. And I always thought, well, one of the people that I've looked up to in my whole life has been someone named Reginald Lewis. Reginald Lewis was the first African-American billionaire. And so he went to school at Virginia State undergrad, and then went to Harvard. He got into Harvard, and he didn't actually take the LSAT. He's like, I think, one of the only students who basically negotiated his way into school. He went into corporate law, became an M&A attorney, and then he started acquiring and buying businesses. And I'm pretty much walking that same path, in my own life. And I looked at him as an example of, wow, he did this in the late 60s, early 70s, that whole thing. There's no reason I can't at least try to do a lot of things that I think would uplift the community. And so the culture that what I learned is, if you step out on faith on things, and you have to do your own part though. So you can't just blindly say, you know what, I'm going to buy a ticket to a foreign country. I've done no research. I haven't reached out to my network. I haven't done any planning. No, what I mean is, you have to try to do your part. And then that part that you can't really control the outcome, you can control your process. So even if it doesn't turn out the way you want it, that's what I take from it. Berkeley could have not turned out that way, but it did. And so, Reginald Lewis, that's the book. I highly recommend it. And if you're in the DC DMV area, he's got a museum in Baltimore that his wife runs now. So that's really my thing. And I learned that culture matters. It matters both who you work with, these companies, if you're getting bad vibes from people, whether it's a law firm, another type of business. Like I always say, like, my tribe is my vibe. And so if that's not vibing right, and your stomach has those funny feelings when you're around certain people, you need to listen.
See, but that also translates to wealth building too. Like the vibe, as you put it, has to match when you are locking arms in solidarity to build wealth, and it's a collaborative effort. And so I appreciate your comments on culture and the pivotal role it plays in just like life and how you go about being you.
Okay, so we just went through the process as it pertains to education. Now, you just mentioned something that's been kind of like floating. You mentioned a few times. One, expat. Let's quickly double click on that one.
Okay. So I set up my firm I launched it in 2017. And when I launched my firm, I decided I was analyzing a couple of places I might want to live. So let me kind of step back on that.
Yep.
People often think I just got on a plane and went to Thailand. Well, when I was in business school, one of my closest friends in business school, literally my first or second day of business school, I met a guy who's from Thailand. I never met a person from Thailand before. I learned while I was in business school and law school in Boston, there's a huge Thai community that ends up going to school in Boston for all the different schools. So that process kind of opened my eyes to okay, that's something, potentially possible. The next thing that happened is, while I was in business school, so the way it worked at Boston College, where I went to my first degree, is you would do your first, if I'm remembering, you do your first year in law school. If you got in, you do your second year in business school. And then what would be your third year, if you stayed normally, you split. And then your fourth year, you split as well. And in that case, I was in my second year of what would have been law school, was my first year of business school, and I met folks from Thailand. So then business school offers different courses, of course, than law school. And I was looking at international business. So I took a course specifically that offered a capstone where we could work with different types of companies abroad to get more international exposure. And in that case, we ended up going to Hong Kong, Bangalore, India, and also into Bangkok, Thailand. So my first time sort of on the ground there, I believe that was around it should have been the summer of 2007. So what I did at that time was I spent about 3 months hopping around Southeast Asia, seeing, for example, seeing Toyota in Bangalore, where they had operations, seeing different businesses operating from Thailand that had operations, seeing businesses in Hong Kong. And then that was my exposure. Like, okay, when I saw the country then, I thought Bangkok has a lot of potential. You could see it's rough around the edges, but like I could see, oh, okay, I was there from a business community perspective. That's what a lot of people miss. I don't go there. I'm not there as a tourist. I'm there meeting with businesses and companies. And so I'll leave folks with this, when you be intentional about what you're trying to do. If you go somewhere and you're looking for shenanigans, you will find it. If you go and you are looking for positive opportunities for international business, you will find that. So be intentional about your thoughts and your actions. And that's how that expat thing came up, Mark. So when I was deciding what countries to look at, I looked at Singapore. My brother had spent a lot of time living there. Japan, I didn't double click on that, but I've been back and forth to Japan since in the late 90s and studying Japanese and all that. The reason I chose Thailand specifically was the proximity in Southeast Asia. You're a short flight away. And also from an operating environment, I thought the quality of life, cost of living would be pretty good versus, Japan or Singapore are just generally a little bit more higher cost and the cultures are slightly different, all great, but just slightly different. So I thought, let's test it out. I didn't necessarily plan to stay in Thailand. I said, let's test it out for 6 months. I was planning to maybe hop back around and, move to Tokyo or somewhere else, but I ended up kind of staying there as my home base.
Dope. Okay. So we got the backstory. We got the origin story now.
The context.
Now let's get into the
people
good stuff.
came for.
So look, this is what people came to see. So I'm gonna let you choose, Corey.
Okay.
Do you want to start off in crypto? Do you want to start in startups? Or do you want to talk about markets? We're going to talk about all three.
Yeah.
But which one do you want to start in first?
I mean, I'm happy to go either one, either of the three. I mean, I can talk about crypto if you want. We can start there. I know some folks know me from that, so happy to.
All right.
I got first question.
Okay.
First
all
question.
right.
I didn't do it.
The people want to know. Is crypto a scam?
Wow, that's a loaded question. No, it's not a scam. I guess I have to be very explicit on how I answer this. Okay, crypto is not a scam, but there historically have been scammers and charlatans and shenanigans related to the industry. And I would say that is not so different than any nascent industry that has popped up. Mm-hmm. So the same with the internet. If you look back, 1999, 98, the first thing that I remember as a high school student, early college student in the internet, it was Napster.
Oh, yeah.
What was Napster? It was downloading your favorite songs for free that you probably shouldn't be downloading.
Risking it all.
Exactly. And now look, everybody and their mom, I have a video I did on this. How many people out there, for people watching this, how many of you right now can buy a vinyl record, a tape, or a CD that you own, and if you were not on a streaming service, you could actually listen to your own music?
I got a record player and hella records.
Okay, I'm in that category too.
I got Michael Jackson, I got all them.
But you see where I'm going, right? We went from people illegally downloading things or not in a gray area to now everyone pretty much consumes almost everything they do. Okay, Mark, I see you. Okay. Oh wow,
I got that. Yeah,
that I don't have, but it's on my list.
So you got to.
Kendrick, yes. I mean, I hope y'all catch the Easter egg on this shirt. I don't know if you can see it.
I did catch it. Look.
Okay. I don't know if the audience is going to catch the Easter egg, but we can definitely double click on that. But that's what I think about the history of technology generally. The main thing to keep in mind, and I think we're living through the pivot of this, Jolene, to your question, which is when these industries pop up and there's no rules and regulation, scammers and charlatans take advantage of the fact that there's no rules and regulations. The benefit of the lack of rules and regulations is generally from a pure tech perspective, you can innovate quickly, develop products, launch, etc. You don't have to deal with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal expenses. The downside is that anybody can start doing that and people can take advantage of having a loud voice and basically rip people off. And we've seen that. Now, I think a lot of that will still be here because we're in the digital world, but I do think we're living through the changes right now. Let's say in the US, where we're having a lot of regulatory changes that are in process, which are going to mean that there will be guardrails and we're going to have more sophisticated entrants into the crypto space. What do I mean by that specifically? Historically, when I say historically, let's say 2015 through 2018, 19,
Yep.
the people that you might have seen in crypto would have been kind of your adventurous risk takers, kind of the people that would have been going west in the 1890s to find gold, the prospectors.
Shout out
right?
to all the miners out there.
Now, what we're seeing is something different. Now we're seeing the Stanford grads, the Harvard grads, the investment banking types, those types of folks who are saying, wait, the industry is becoming a little bit more mature.
Yep.
The regulatory environment is becoming a little bit more predictable and friendly.
Mhm.
And they are starting to enter with a new crop of startups. And so what I think now is we're going to start seeing more of the sophisticated types of crypto-based businesses. Now, that doesn't mean that a Shiba Inu token is something you should bet your house on. No, that's there. You shouldn't do that. I look at crypto just for everybody's clarity. I look at crypto no different than how I would look at venture-backed companies. And the
Okay.
only difference is that crypto allows your average person to participate in the venture,
Yep.
but current securities laws do not allow your average person, for the most part,
For
to
venture
participate.
capital.
Exactly. And so then I would make another distinction. I would separate Bitcoin from the rest of crypto. So
Okay.
when I think about Bitcoin personally, I think about it like a commodity and a risk on asset. Historically, let's say the last few years, the market correlations to Bitcoin are basically to NASDAQ and S&P.
Yep.
So, and why is that? Well, I think, and most folks who've been in the space, it's really a liquidity metric. It's kind of the most sensitive asset to global liquidity meaning M2 money supply.
Yep.
The other various forms of crypto, so just to keep it simple, Ethereum, Solana, etc., I think about them conceptually as tech companies that have a business that is based on the blockchain. And the reason I make that distinction is that there's no individual guiding the Bitcoin project. It was created by an individual or group, and then it was released to the wild. And everything we see today is organic.
Mhm.
For the other projects, they have much more versions of involvement of software teams, development teams, community governance, which is, I would consider, a 21st century version of your corporate governance on the blockchain. And so
Yeah.
that's the distinction I would make.
Well, Mark, I know you got questions, so I'll let you go, but I do have a
No,
question.
go ahead. Follow up.
So, you had mentioned, you just said distinctions just made me remember a question I had earlier about this. So, like, would you say when it comes to this distinction, I guess the question is there a distinction between like the crypto startups and Web 3.0, or would you say that it's all the same wave of innovation?
Now I would say it's all the same. I would consider Web3 and crypto to
Mhm.
be the same thing. Web3 generally referring to Web 3.0,
Mhm.
as opposed to Web 1.0, which would be like pre-Netscape kind of original AOL, Web 2.0 being kind of Netscape and after, and Web 3 being things like metaverse and all that sort of stuff that has come up, where you have much more of a blend of blockchain and internet working together. I think that, my own personal understanding and definition of that would be Web3 encompasses crypto, just like an NFT is a part of Web3 is a part of crypto. Some people would make a different distinction, but I think it's in the same, they're in the same church, so to
Okay.
speak.
So speaking of NFTs, so let's go through that, because we went through that whole phase where there was a lot of NFTs that were like literally flooding the market and everything else, that were creating a lot of opportunities for folks, and a lot of folks there was a lot of craze, and then essentially it died down.
Crickets.
So would that be the signal that the fact that we've now passed the phase one, like I tend to see them in phases, just like what we see in tech, the same thing, like what we're dealing with AI. We're now moving past phase one of AI and moving into phase two. So one, have we moved out of phase one as it pertains to the general consumer crypto craze? And now are we moving into phase two? And if we are, what does that look like for, say, for example, investors or your average consumers within crypto?
Yeah, I would say we have moved out. So I would put the entire 2020 era of
the pandemic,
extreme monetary policy, GameStop, all that. Basically, I would put that in the bucket of governments printing money and everything going up, kind of an everything bubble scenario. Now, I do think the tech itself is valid. So the tech of NFTs will allow things like, let's say this shirt here, actually, this is from the Marathon store. So folks who are familiar with Nipsey and his brother, his family, what they're doing with Marathon Clothing, they have embedded things in these shirts where you can scan them and then you can go and get specific discounts and things related to their stores. Well, that's a valid technology. That is, something that allows a business to differentiate itself and establish like a direct customer connection.
Correct.
That is not hype. That's real.
Yep.
But, people paying tens of millions of dollars for a Beeple JPEG effectively that has some sort of scarcity, I do think that is a bit overblown. But the underlying tech, I still consider that phase one. I think where we are now to look at phase two, I think there's a couple of things that are happening behind the scenes that, crypto price volatility it obscures. And so what are some of those things? I think in this phase two, I think the regulatory environment that is becoming more solidified and clear is going to mean, and means currently, that more sophisticated players are going to be involved. And what that means is, I'll give another specific example. Back in that 21 era, there was a DJ, I think his name was, I don't want to misspeak his name. There was a DJ who had created an NFT that would allow you to like get royalties, songs on the song, on the NFT, things like that. I know Nas and Mass Appeal Records were working on something like that as well, but the regulations stopped it. And the reason the regulations stopped it from a U.S.
Steve Aoki. Steve Aoki.
There you go. I didn't want to misspeak his name. The reason that the regulations stopped it was, if I'm a business founder as a startup, I'm not going to put millions of dollars into the tech stack, the marketing, the sales and distribution, and then get a lawsuit for $100 million from the SEC and potentially lose all the money we've spent in getting this launched. And so I think with the clarity around that, you're going to see that. And I think 2.0 of crypto is going to be tokenization of real world assets. It's going to be tokenization of things like multifamily properties on the real estate side. It's going to be things like the music publishing, where I know Jay-Z had the idea with Tidal when they sold it, which was that, for example, if you use Tidal and you stream a certain artist a lot, you'll see like, Corey, you stream XYZ artist a lot, or Jolyn, you stream Y artist. What I think can come next is that the artist, instead of having to sign with a record label in this example, the artist could have a token whereby Corey, Jolyn, and Mark participate, and in exchange, we can get a portion of the publishing or the royalties from those songs. And the way music publishing works is, in simple form, every time you hear a song play on a DSP or on a radio or in a movie, that artist, if they didn't sell their publishing, end up in a rinky-dink deal,
360 deal,
a 360 deal, or as 36 used to say, rinky-dink records. If they didn't end up in one of those, then they would have money coming in, as Nipsey said, mailbox money that comes in from each of these songs. Well, once the legal environment is clear, the opportunity is that an independent artist, speaking of the Bay Area, people like Larry King, people like, yes, they will be able to go to the community. You can put your money up and potentially get a piece of that album retail. So that, I think, is going to come. The multifamily piece is going to come. A lot of the blockchain tech we see now, you could call some of it hype, but just like the internet, when we had, you know, the .com bubble, right? Amazon's famous Time magazine, Amazon crashed, and look at Amazon today, right? You can't really live your life without somehow touching what they're doing. So I think that's where we are. I think the biggest difference between now and then and between, let's say, traditional VC and crypto is that the token component of crypto gives you real-time market prices.
Yep.
We never knew the valuations of Facebook and Google and all
until a term sheet was signed.
Until a term sheet was signed. And even then, we wouldn't immediately see fluctuations in the price.
Right.
It wasn't until an IPO or until a company was forced by audit to take a write down or markdown.
Yep.
And I think that noise is what can distract us from the broader signal of like, okay, where is this going? Where this is going is, I think, almost everything we do is going to be blockchain based. But if it's successful, it will end up being just like the iPhones that people use, and the innovation of iPhones, in my opinion, it was that the user interface was so smooth and simple, is that you could hand it to a 4-year-old or a 74-year-old and they could figure it out.
Yep.
I think that's the part that's going to take time, but I think that's where we're headed.
So we got a question for you in the chat.
Yep.
What's the top 5 crypto coins that Corey owns?
Okay, I'll give you the disclaimer that nothing I say here should be taken as investment advice.
There it is.
Do your own research.
Well, yes, sir.
Do your own due diligence. And most of these coins could be considered speculation, and you could lose everything.
Yep.
So with that, I would say the most important crypto that I hold right now is going to start with Bitcoin, the original.
Yep.
Original crypto asset, really a peer-to-peer cash asset.
You got to have the OG in there.
And I tell people all the time when they ask me this question, I say, look, go read the Bitcoin white paper. If you don't understand it, put the sections you don't understand into ChatGPT and ask it to explain the concepts.
Yep.
Because by understanding Bitcoin, it forces you to have a base level understanding of finance, economics, game theory, all sorts of other areas that are become relevant in your life, regardless of whether you think Bitcoin is something or not.
Yep.
Outside of Bitcoin, right now, I'm not holding too much.
Okay.
I've been in the cycle since 2013. So I've seen these things go up and go down and go up and go down.
You're waiting for the accumulation period to hit.
ICO craze, losing different tokens, making a bunch of money in Bitcoin. I've done it all. Making a bunch of money in Bitcoin. And then you think, oh, I should go invest in this new hot token. And then that kind of eventually crashes. So now what I'm doing is just sitting tight in the Bitcoin that I have, seeing how things play out. There are other projects. So what I would give the general recommendation is this: if you look at or Google the teams, if you think about this like a venture capitalist, what are venture capitalists doing when they invest in a startup? They are generally backing teams, they're backing humans, they're backing ideas, and they're backing execution.
Yep.
Those are the things that VCs are thinking about. So think about this the same way. So you should be able to Google and look up for all these different projects. Like if you take Ethereum as the next big player, well, you can look at the team, you can look at the execution, you can look at the coders behind it, and you can think about Ethereum in that same way. You can look at layer 2s like Polygon, Optimism, things like that. And what layer 2s are for everyone here, Ethereum, as you may remember, they have gas fees. These are transaction fees effectively. What that has meant over time is that, like when the NFT craze hit, for example, the fees and the congestion on the Ethereum highway was really high. It's like the 405 or the 101 in LA at 5:30.
Yep.
You aren't going anywhere.
You're
so
not going anywhere.
What layers 2s do, layer 2s are designed, and the most famous layer 2 that everyone here will know is Base, which was created by Coinbase. So what Coinbase did is they basically took a fork of Ethereum. A fork means an open source copy. And they created their own network that is high throughput, low cost, low transaction fee. And so I would say if you were looking at the space, look at Base, look at the projects being built on Base. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is Coinbase is plugging a lot of that into the broader Coinbase ecosystem.
Okay. All right. So I have to ask.
Okay.
Meme coins. I want to know your thoughts on it. I have to.
Okay.
You know, I had to.
It had to be done.
It had to be done. I promise the next question will be a little bit more
I know
challenging.
we do have more serious questions, but go ahead.
I look at me. I'm a big fan of Premier League. I am a Chelsea fan, the English Premier League, even though my team is doing terrible right now. Don't walk away. I know everybody. Now on my fantasy team, I've got Liverpool players. We won't name any names, but you know. But my point is, I look at meme coins, no different than a fan jersey, no different than a Lakers jersey for LeBron. To me, that's what a meme coin is. It's a 21st century version of social commentary.
Got it.
All the fluff about is this a security? No, it's a social statement in a new form. That's it. That's what I consider a meme coin.
Bet. Okay, so let's get into it because, as you know, like what happens in the US versus the rest of the world are two totally different places. Yep. So what is it that you're seeing, given in the sense that you have this knowledge base as well as experience of living as an expat? What is it that you're seeing as it pertains to the crypto world specifically? What is it that you're seeing there versus here in the US? Okay,
so that's a great question, and I'll take it in regions. So I'll say North America. Let's take North America, Europe. I'm going to leave out Africa for right now, but not forgetting people, not at all my people. And then we're going to take Asia. So if we take, let's start in Asia and work our way to the West. So in Asia, historically, and when I say historically, let's say in the last 15 to 20 years, they've had various versions of financial crises that most people in the West don't know about. So for example, in 98, when the Hong Kong dollar depegged, that is a period of time where you might remember that the transition, Hong Kong was a British protectorate. They were administered by the UK. They had a handover to China in 98. Well, one of the things that came from that is that depegging of the currency actually caused a currency crisis in Southeast Asia. In most countries in the region, they had a currency crisis. And what that means is countries had debt in dollars, but those countries cannot print those dollars. They print local currency. Singapore dollar, Hong Kong dollar, Thai baht, Korean won, Japanese yen, etc. Right? But you're a foreign country, you don't have dollars. But for historical reasons, countries go to debt markets and they borrow money in dollars. The reason for that is liquidity. Is the same reason all the pension funds own Apple stock. It's not because they love it per se, they might, but it's a deep liquid market that you can buy and sell if you need to. Now, with that backdrop, that meant that after these financial crises, countries in the developing world historically have had what's called capital controls. And that means that if you are in any emerging market, let's say Mark wants to make a $100,000 investment into an emerging market country, you getting that money in is relatively easy. You make your investment, you follow the rules, you check your boxes, you send your bank wire. Getting the money out is a bit more difficult. And the reason it's a bit more difficult is what I just talked about with the financial crisis that happened in Asia in the 97, 98, 99 timeframe. And the reason for that is and we're going to live through this now, actually. Great question. So now in the modern US market, you've got the dollar going down. With the dollar going down, capital is going to start flowing to emerging markets. We're already seeing that flowing to Europe, flowing to emerging markets. If you live in the emerging market, that is foreign direct investment for that central bank. So the person that lives there, that's money coming in from foreigners into the country. That's also called hot money, because that money that can come into your stock market, can come into your equities, can come in. It can also do what? Come right back leave. That's what caused the financial crisis in the 80s, in Asia, in the late 90s. Now, why is crypto relevant? Well, when Bitcoin came about, all of a sudden, you have a peer-to-peer cashless money-like, at the time, money-like system, electronic money, that Corey can be anywhere in the world and he can send Jolyn or Mark some Bitcoin to start off. And you see that in El Salvador, you see that in other countries. Now, if you're a central banker, you've been watching this and you see what's happened with stable coins. So let's quickly discuss that. Stable coins are, what they mean is stable value. They were originally created
non-volatile.
Exactly. They were originally created for the purpose of Bitcoin-based projects and then Ethereum-based projects who raise money in ICOs, right? So pretend you're now corporate treasurer. You raise your ICO, you've got a few $1 million worth of Bitcoin or Ethereum. The problem is every day you look at your screen, the value is going up and down and up and down. And you've got to make payroll for the software devs on your team helping to build things out. That's a problem. So what ended up being invented was stable coins to mean stable value. And what that is, in sum, is just a digital version of a dollar or a euro that is designed to maintain the stability of that dollar or that euro within basis points. So like 0.00001, etc. And so the reason for that is that you can hold things in treasury and in savings. Now, think about this. Imagine if you had a financial crisis in 1997 and your country has Bitcoin or has stable coins. The first thing Corey, Mark, or Jolyn is going to do is take 100% of their local currency and put it in Bitcoin or USD stable coins. And they're going to get on a plane or get on a boat and they're going to get out of there.
Get out of there.
And now your government has a problem. That is the issue. That is the issue that Asia has been thinking a lot about as a developing market. So not necessarily a particular country, but that's what central bankers are thinking and worrying about. And the rules that exist now and some of the policies in the last 5 or 6 years have been about protecting domestic economies and financial flows, not so much of we care about crypto, more so of we care about the stability of our country and our economy. Now that's the East and the Asian perspective. And also that reflects the Africa perspective, places like Nigeria, etc. If you take it to Europe, Europe has a different issue. Europe is historically their business model. And again, I love Europe, nothing against folks there, but culturally is developed differently, as we can all agree, than other places around the world. Let's say post 1945, post World War II, Europe has developed historically based to now with a large industrial manufacturing base, right? Think Mercedes, BMW, think Siemens, these big Nokia before the iPhone came. Big state-backed industrial firms. The way Europe has looked at crypto is basically they don't think about it in the Western way of privatized startups. They think about it as a threat to state-backed industries. And what they've done is done things like pushing CBDCs, which is central bank digital currencies. What that is literally state-backed digital currency. Just replace the word state-backed digital currency. And what they're trying to do there is maintain control of the currency, maintain control of the EU as a governing body and policy. The US, as the kind of the new country on the block, right? The history of this country is people who left wherever they were from and they've come here, right? So we have more of a private enterprise, free enterprise approach. Historically, not related to crypto, just historically as a nation. Now what you're seeing with crypto is you're seeing a divergence. You're seeing the current administration look at this just like we look at VC and tech. Ask yourself, how many large tech companies have gone public based out of Europe? Wonder why. We'll leave it there. Now, that I think there's many reasons for that. Again, we love our brothers all across the world, but there's a very large cultural component to that cultural and historical. And so a lot of that is how systems and peoples govern themselves. So I think that's what we're seeing. As it relates to the US, I suspect that by Labor Day this year, most likely we get some sort of market structure rules around crypto, meaning who can issue stable coins, what the requirements are, what's not a security, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're going to also get rules that make it favorable for large crypto projects not based in the US to re-domicile into the US for tax purposes and for all sorts of other advantages. And I think we're going to start to see that happen. We're going to start to see, let's say, the US competing a bit more with places like Dubai and the UAE for a lot of the capital in the crypto space who's gone there after kind of hopscotching around the world and things. And so that's kind of where I think we are now. And where I think Asia is going to be is a version of that US approach, kind of regulatory guardrails, making sure you're not going to have fraud and bad actors. They probably have a bit stricter rules, but I think they're going to be less like Europe and more like the US.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, and I'll stop here, is that Singapore is the trade hub, the trade and financial hub in Asia for all sorts of stuff. They are effectively the Switzerland of Asia. So Switzerland is known for finance and banking. Singapore is the same thing. They're not going to create rules that would effectively kill or cut off an entire new industry to their banking system. And I think that's going to force the rest of Asia to follow similar policies from a competitive perspective.
So
there was a question back up, Mark.
Yeah, I did. So I'm there. Okay. So we have a question from one of the cousins in the chat. So he quote, Corey, what are the implications of adding cryptocurrency to the US Reserve, considering the volatility of the crypto market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll give my personal opinion on that, and then I'll say, here's what I think. So I'll separate Bitcoin from everything else. And then, so we'll talk about Bitcoin first. I think the concept of holding Bitcoin, there are pros and cons either way. I think what the original intention of the quote cyberpunks who created Bitcoin and that ethos, that community, was about, you can call it libertarianism or personal independence from government. And there's a school of thought that says, hey guys and girls, we do not like the fact that you are basically inviting the government into the space in a way that's giving it outsized power. I think it's a risk. I'm not going to say I think it's bad or I think it's good. I think it's a risk because political administrations change. Prerogatives change. In legal terms, exigent circumstances can occur. Exigent circumstances is a very specific term, and it means unforeseen events that require unforeseen actions. So that is what people that take a view that this is negative, that's what they think. They think, hey, we might be happy now for the next few years, but like, where could this go with the government so large in the space? Now, as it relates to the rest of the digital asset space that's not Bitcoin, I think it's risky. I think it's risky because the appearance is that there's some grift going on. I can't say that that's true, but the appearance. I don't know. I don't know whether it's good or bad. I think we'll have to see. We'll have to see kind of how things play out. If we look back in 4 to 5 years and we see an industry that's flourished and we see all sorts of different types of startups and companies and opportunities, I think we'll look back and say, okay, this was fine. If we look back and we see, 20 people who've become deca billionaires, I think we'll look back and say, well, you know what? That wasn't a good idea. That led to a lot of human nature-based problems. So I'm going to give folks the benefit of the doubt right now, but I'd say I'm skeptical on everything outside of Bitcoin. And I don't necessarily think the government should be purchasing Bitcoin. I think, again, the same issue. If you can buy it, then you can sell it. So the details of how that will work are going to matter quite a bit.
What can they glean from the frameworks that Singapore and Switzerland implement now as far as remaining competitive and entering that market?
Okay, so I'll talk about Singapore first. I know it fairly well. I've done a lot of work in the jurisdiction in different capacities. So Singapore has something called the Payment Services Act. So right around it might have been late 2018, early 2019, Singapore started seeing a lot of crypto businesses deciding to set up companies or foundations there and then issue tokens from there, because Singapore didn't have like set rules on. It was kind of a gray area. They didn't have the approach of the US where it's like, we're going to just sue you out of existence. But they also had more of a laissez-faire approach that said like, hey, as long as you're not violating these streamlined set of rules, you can like issue your token and we'll leave you alone. And so what ended up happening there was their government, the MAS, which is the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is their version of the Federal Reserve, they worked with the legislators and put together the Payment Services Act. And what that did was it took the fintech rules, so think Stripe and Square, and it also took things around the crypto digital asset space and put them together. So they were well ahead of the US in that. And they created a streamlined system. So they have a strong banking sector. And what they did was, so if, for example, anybody watching this, if you use Coinbase, Coinbase has, a US entity, a UK entity, and they have a Singapore entity. So I think they may have one in Japan as well, but most of their business, when they first went to Southeast Asia, they went under this Payment Services Act. They followed the various rules and they set up an exchange there. And it's relatively straightforward about what you need to do and how you qualify, and everybody likes it. And I think that is the key for how we're going to see things from now. I think the main piece is we're going to see probably tweaks around their rules to stay competitive with whatever the US ultimately comes out with. And go back to the question again for the next part. I want to make sure I didn't miss any of
I was just asking, like, based on the frameworks that Singapore and Switzerland have together.
Yes.
Yeah, Switzerland.
So Switzerland, I want to make sure I didn't miss that. So Switzerland's rules are already in place. They were literally the first place to put these rules in. And that's why the Ethereum Foundation is based in Zug, Z-U-G, Switzerland. Just for a quick geography reference for folks, Switzerland is similar. I'll use a US analogy. In the US, we have the different states. Switzerland has what they call cantons. Mm-hmm. And each canton has a bit of autonomy more than the states do in the US. The reason that the Ethereum Foundation is based in Zug, Switzerland, is when Vitalik and the team first did the ICO and they were looking for a place to domicile, they were able to go to the canton of Zug, which is the town there, and basically work out rules for their foundation, because there was already a foundation law. It just never existed for digital assets. And so the canton of Zug was pretty accommodating from a business and legal standpoint and set up the structure working with them as kind of the first one. And that's why over the years, you've seen a lot of projects kind of move and domicile there, and their rules there still exist today. So anybody watching this, if you wanted to go through the process and, hire the local lawyers and do all the structuring, you could set up a foundation today based in Zug and take advantage of the same rules and structures that Ethereum has. And I suspect on the US side, folks will be looking quite closely at that from a competitive perspective.
So we got one more question, which is kind of like leading us outside of, we're getting ready to transition before we head out. Somebody says, ask what he think about the Internet of Things, AI, and smart contracts capability, how the future of technology is going to look.
Oh, wow. That's a big one.
That's a loaded question.
Okay. Internet of Things, AI, and crypto. Okay. So IoT generally is referring to, connected devices, right? Your smart TV, your smart refrigerator, etc. I think we're already seeing IoT and AI come together. So IoT and AI is just going to mean your Alexa is that much smarter. It's going to remember everything you've ever said and spit it back to you. And it's going to be able to characterize the date you said it and the time.
It's like, Alexa, you lying. No, you said it here on this.
Exactly. And they're going to play your voice back. So that's where that's going. I think it's probably already capable of doing
it.
It
is.
They just don't want to freak people out. So I think that type of thing is going to be there. And I think where crypto comes into play is that any kind of all Internet of Things is, and let's abstract it. Internet of Things just means connected devices to the internet. The whole purpose of connecting them is to make them smarter. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an application left field nobody's thinking of. So think drones. Internet of Things, drones with AI. There's civilian applications and there's military applications.
Yes, there are.
Your drones can be smart in many different ways. A civilian, let's say I'm walking down the street, I could set my drone up with AI. I could give it a target area, have it run a time lapse and come back at a certain amount of time.
Yep.
That's available. Now, military applications, we'll just leave that where it is and you can imagine. And so in the crypto space, where I think we're going to start to see these things is that the simple one is going to be something like paying with Bitcoin and paying with stable coins. I suspect any day now you'll be able to go to a McDonald's. It'll probably be a McDonald's, a Wendy's, some sort of fast food place, potentially like a Whole Foods and Amazon. You'll be able to go and you'll be able to make your payment by just tapping your phone. And instead of it doing Apple Pay to your Visa, it's just going to do Apple Pay from your Coinbase or your Base account in stablecoins. Mm-hmm. That's, to me, the low-hanging fruit of marrying fintech with AOT with crypto. That's low-hanging fruit. I think some of the stuff that we're going to see down the line will be things like
home buying.
I'll paint a future. Yeah, a future could be home buying. The future could be you going to a concert for your favorite artist. And when you walk into the venue or your favorite Lakers game or Chicago's Bulls or wherever, Blue Jays, whatever team you like, when you walk into that stadium, it's going to now identify you as potentially like an NFT token holder, a season ticket holder, a ticket holder with a floor seat or a box seat or a corporate owner. And then you may be able to think Green Bay Packers, right? Green Bay Packers is owned by the community.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. You could receive stablecoin dividend distributions and they go right into your Bank of America account. And it looks just like it does today, but it's stablecoins. And now if I'm a dividend holder or a royalty holder of music, etc., I'm now no longer tied to my city, my state, right? I could be that artist. I could be that Taylor Swift. I could be, people like Nipsey, rest in peace. I could be current artists where when you come to the show, you may get something, but maybe I offer you the ability to live stream it and you get something slightly different from a digital online perspective. So I think that's where the future is going. I think it's going to get there pretty quick. I think the day-to-day volatility that we see is blinding people to the tech innovation in the same way that when Amazon crashed in the .com, people thought the entire thing was trash. The entire internet business model, they threw the whole thing out. So I think that's where we're going. That's where we're going.
So we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. So right now, the cousin should be blocking out the noise and really dig into imagination and innovation and just be thinking about all these different use cases. It sounds like the future is going to be hella custom. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. And I would say that doesn't mean rush in today and try to pick bottoms and buy things and watch them going down. No. I mean, specifically, I would take the time to be educated because when the macro environments are all cycles, they're sine curves. Right? It's a sine curve. Once things hit a trough, they're going to start moving up again and hitting a peak. And once they hit a peak, they're going to start moving down again and hitting a trough. And what folks need to do is, what I personally do, is that you keep and stay and get educated. Right? Learning about these different types of technologies, because that way, if and when we hit some sort of bottom, you're not just randomly throwing darts at the board. Oh, I should just buy this, buy that. You have an understanding. Another advantage people have is when markets are in downturns, you can actually send direct messages to teams, to dev teams, to founders. They have time to talk to you. They don't have 1,000 resumes of everybody who wants a job because it's in front of them every day.
Right.
So think differently about that. That's when you can get in the door with people who, when it's a boom time, they don't have time to talk to you.
So speaking of which, since we're transitioning from that, and by the way, folks, because there's a lot of questions that are in the chat, Corey. So, which is a sign that like they're like, bring him back on, bring him back on. Don't worry, Corey will be back. We're gonna work some things out. So trust and believe. All right, so let's transition it to from the crypto markets.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna pull you over a little bit to my world.
Okay.
Come to my world for a second. Now, as you know, let's talk about the public market real quick, and then we're gonna briefly touch it, and then we're gonna go over to private markets, where I know that this is like, look, if you thought that what he talked about in crypto, just wait. All right, so we're seeing a lot of volatility, not only in crypto markets, but we're also seeing it in equity markets.
Yep.
Especially like the Mag 7 ultimately dragging down, pretty much the S&P 500. Some led by, of course, we're seeing massive drawdowns by, like, let's say Tesla down 50%, Nvidia down significantly, Meta not so much, but essentially, like, they're all taking their medicine right now. Mm-hmm. Out of the Mag 7, in your opinion, which company do you think stands the best chance over the next, let's say, 3 years to lead the 7?
Whoa, that's a tough question. Predictions are incredibly hard. So
yeah, I know. We won't hold you. I'm not going to hold you. I just want, I want to hear your thought process.
I'll give you my thought process, and I'll caveat that I could be totally wrong because I do not have a crystal ball. And I'm going to go in the traditional VC way. I'm going to back. Again, you said, what was the time frame again? Let's be very clear for
over the next 3 years.
3 years. Okay.
Because a lot of innovation takes place over 3 years.
Yeah, I'm going to back right now. It may not be a popular decision, but I think Tesla.
I knew it.
And I'm going to tell you why. Let me clean it up, folks, and don't hate my opinion. Again, this is
they're not going to hate your opinion. It's just
totally wrong.
We're hearing your thesis.
I am about 3/4 of the way, about 75% of the way through the biography by Walter Isaacson on Elon Musk.
Okay.
Folks in the audience, I know he's a polarizing figure, love him or hate him, right? But the author of the book, Walter Isaacson, also did the book on Steve Jobs.
Yep.
It's pretty much the authoritative book. And he also wrote the authoritative book on the history of Benjamin Franklin. I highly recommend folks look this guy up. You can confirm, and I have the physical book, all 600 pages.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson.
Okay.
So why am I saying Tesla? I'm not saying Tesla because of what the stock price is doing today. I'm not saying Tesla because of what, new thing Elon is pumping out like P.T. Barnum. What I am looking at is, in reading this book, and I'm living on Earth. Mm-hmm. I'm backing the ingenuity of a generational entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm backing. I think within 3 to 5 years, when I say Tesla, one thing I've learned about the way Elon thinks about his companies, we know the one name, but he thinks about this as a collective. He's thinking about Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, Boring Company, Starlink as one ecosystem. There's one ticker that trades, but he's not looking at it that way. Now, he has his own issues, again, well documented, won't go through any of that, don't support or validate any of that stuff. But I'm saying purely from a business perspective of picking a ticker, I'm going to pick
You're just looking at the company. We're just looking at the company.
The company and the entrepreneur behind it that is the single reason the United States has a space program in 2025.
That's
period, full stop. There was no space program. So, and why I say Tesla, again, another additional analysis is that you learn from reading the book, the learnings of how to build a Tesla were used in the learnings of how to put that rocket in space and how to allow it to come back and be reusable, and how to create a business model around the various companies that allows that future state to occur. That's what I'm backing. So, for example, just for folks here who may be skeptical, and I highly encourage you to read the book, whether you love them or hate them. You cannot read it and not learn something that you can better yourself with, period. So Starlink and SpaceX. There's a long discussion around SpaceX, why it can't work, why putting rockets, why it's too expensive, etc. One of the lessons I learned from the book was he took the shop and machining approach of creating Teslas, which are made of, in like the different
use the same thing for rockets.
Use the same thing for rockets. And when the engineers would say that's not possible, he would have folks from Tesla and SpaceX and Starlink go talk to each other. All the engineers at all his companies talk to each other in a symbiotic way to translate those learnings. So he would have the engineers at Tesla on the shop floor at SpaceX and vice versa, so that space tech can be potentially implemented in the car tech and vice versa. Yep. And I think the synergy of all that, given all the different companies and things he's got going on, I think that's going to create a significant advantage for that company long term. That doesn't mean you need to run out and buy something today or tomorrow. I'm not saying that. But on a 3 to 5 year, I would definitely be looking at what they're doing.
Yeah. So the reason why it's very interesting that I knew that you were going to say that, it was either going to be a toss-up between NVIDIA for me or Tesla. Those were the two that I was thinking that you were going to head down. Like, it was just, I was like, okay. All right, so let's move it over to private, because I know that we're starting to run out of time. So let's talk about like your world of the private side. So before I even ask you any questions there, can you discuss a little bit about like what do deals look like outside of the norm that everybody's so accustomed to on the international side?
Oh, great question. I actually just recorded a video the other day on financing. So I would say the biggest difference, let's take Asia and then the US, because when I say, let's take Asia, Africa, so developing world and or Southeast Asia, and then let's separate that from, let's say, North America and Europe. Historically, US law is based on English law.
Yep.
So literally, if you go to law school, the first things you start reading are these super old cases that you can't understand what they're saying. And the reason you can't understand it is because you're reading, 1800 British English.
Is that like torts or something like that?
All the first year type of classes, you're reading contract law. Those contract law cases all come from English common law. And so it's difficult because not the concepts, but the words on the page are like 17th, 18th century words. Why do I say that? Because the rules in the West broadly are all based on English common law with slight differences. Any former British protectorate, same thing, based on British common law. So Singapore, why is Singapore also happens to be one of the more popular jurisdictions when people first want to go to Asia? It's because they were formerly a British protectorate. Now, as it relates to how we see things developing, traditionally in Asia, there has been a real aversion to risk-taking, but a real love of profit making. How does that work?
Say that again.
There's an aversion. There's an aversion to risk-taking, but there's a love of profit making. What does that mean? How does it manifest itself? It manifests itself in a lot of ways you wouldn't think. So, for example, in Japan, they have a venture capital set of laws that allow tech startups to form. One of my professors at Berkeley actually was one of the instrumental folks drafting those laws. He was a professor in Japan and in Berkeley. And I used to talk to him about it, took all his classes and all that, wrote some articles on it. But one of the big things you start to realize is that when you look at the law, it has the same words on the page that you would expect to see as a founder in Silicon Valley. One key caveat. In culture locally, going bankrupt is a shameful thing that can't be allowed effectively. You become a pariah. If one of the reasons why we don't see the same startup dynamisms that we see in the West, in the East, and in many countries is that the concept of going bankrupt and restarting a startup and trying again. No. If you lose people's money once, you are a pariah forever regardless of the fact pattern around what happened.
Right.
In the US, it's like, oh, you burn 20, 30, 80 million.
Come back, dust yourself off and try again.
That's the thing. So what does that mean? It means that for example, I'll give you a very specific example. Under Japanese law, if a founder were to go bankrupt, the directors and the authorized representatives are actually personally on the hook in the bankruptcy code. That's the difference. The startup law looks the exact same as it would, or similar as it would in the West.
Yeah.
But that one little detail that if you file for bankruptcy, you are personally liable and your directors and officers are personally liable, it means that the rules don't operate how they would anywhere else. What that means is that when you're raising, let's say venture capital, if, Mark and I are raising, myself, Mark, and Jolene, we're raising a startup and we're somewhere on the West Coast or in the Midwest or whatever, we're doing what we're doing. And we go to VCs, we get safe agreements, right? Safe agreements are simple agreements for future equity. That means somebody's going to write us a check for $100K, $250K, $500,000, $1 million, and we'll give them a discount when we convert at a price round. We'll do these little things. We can close that deal basically in 3 to 4 days max.
Yep.
Okay. And we can just off and run in founders and do our startup. Mm-hmm. We don't have a legal obligation to raise another round because under the safe, you could raise another round, but not a legal obligation to raise another round. You could say, hey, it didn't work out. You, me, we're not on the hook for that. The other instrument that we have in the West is called the convertible note.
Yep.
A convertible note is shorthand for convertible debt.
Yep.
That is historically on the East Coast, of course, being more conservative. New York investors would say to a West Coast startup, we all need convertible notes. We all need convertible notes because we don't know what you guys out there are going to do. Over the last 15 years or so, the ethos of the West has kind of moved east, and that now in the US, it's kind of market standard. Everybody would do a safe.
Yep.
Why wouldn't you do a safe? Well, if I'm giving Jolene and Mark, let's say $2 million, and I'm like, guys, I'm not so comfortable that if something doesn't work out, like you don't have to call me anymore. So I would do a convertible note, which means in 18 months, we have to have a conversation. You have to either raise a round from a VC at a certain price that I can convert in, or we got to have a conversation and I'm coming on the cap table and we're shareholders and we're all together now. One of the two. In Asia, you tend to never see safes. No. Capital NEVER.
It's all just equity, right?
Culturally, you'll see convertible note, convertible debts. They call them convertible bonds, depending on the country. Convertible notes or convertible bonds. But the concept is that this is a debt instrument. And the reason is culturally, people want the upside, but they don't want any of that downside. And they want to be able to say, we can take control of whatever you have been doing if we need to. Yep. And so the convertible note concept, sometimes again, is called a convertible bond or convertible debt instrument. That is what you're going to see as a startup in Asia before you get to a priced venture round. Yep. When you get to a priced venture round, it's going to be the exact same in the West. And then the same thing in Europe. Europe is the same pretty much as it is in the US. I'd still say convertible notes are a bit more popular in the European markets as well for similar reasons.
I mean, no wonder you see stuff coming out of here first.
Yeah.
Because it's more encouraging,
It's the risk aversion as well as
risk taking. Not to say that there aren't great innovations and things coming out, but what that has meant in the market. So I can tell you what it means in the market. It means in the market that in Asia, generally, most startups you see coming out have corporate venture capital investment as opposed to pure VC investment. Yep. So if you look at a cap table and there's 10 investors, you may have a large public or banking conglomerate as the largest investor on a tech company coming out of Asia. And the smaller investors will be traditional VCs versus here it's much more dynamic of who you might see on the cap tables.
So, so as we know, we're probably in this arena where we're starting to see where venture capital is definitely going through some of the tough moments, especially post Silicon Valley Bank. So the VC market here in the US has become a little bit tighter. So I'm going to ask you a little bit of, I'm going to ask you to put a little bit of your legal hat on, but I'm also going to ask you, before you put the legal hat on, I also want you to tell us, like, what does it look like, you know, on the other side of the pond as well? Like, are we seeing some of that same tightening, or are we saying that, okay, hey, capital is a little bit loose on the east, on the far east side, in the sense of like capital is flowing, or are those markets also getting tight as well?
Yeah, I'd say from the global capital perspective, we're all one big happy family and everything's connected. And the reason, I'll give you concrete examples of that. So let's take 2020 through 2023 or so. Because of the history of the US and the dollar, the US is the global market publicly for liquidity, right? Your Apple, your Mag 7s, et cetera. But on the private market side, if you think about it, a lot of those big type unicorn type of companies outside of a handful have historically been Western-based companies, Western meaning US-based or sometimes Canadian. And if think about it from a capital allocator perspective, I'll use that word specifically, meaning you are a corporate treasurer, CFO, pension fund, venture capitalist with investors to represent. You want to allocate capital to markets with high growth, high total addressable markets, explosive opportunities. What that has meant is that globally, investors are all chasing the same types of investments in this market, in the Western market. And so, for example, on a large tech, just take a company like a Coinbase or like that before they went public, their investors, or even Binance in the news recently, I think Abu Dhabi or Dubai gave them, you know, like a $2 billion investment, some insane investment. We see if you're a multi-billion-dollar investment fund and you're in Tokyo or you're in Singapore or you're in Thailand or you're in anywhere else, you want into those same investments that folks on Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto want. So they're all on a lot of the similar cap tables when you get to these very large high growth startups. So what historically tends to happen, and I'll say, let's take the .com as an allegory, and then let's work it to now. In the .com era, that was the first time that you started to see VC really take off. Like it had done little things before, but like, you know, the PayPals, the Yahoo, the Amazons, all that. That led to the first time in modern history where corporations said, hey, we need to set up a venture capital arm because we want to get in on this too. Now, outside of the US, in Asia, back then, most of those large corporates that would have the money to do that, they didn't really do it. They weren't legal. The legal systems weren't where they were. It's 25 years ago. They just weren't where they are. Now, let's say post 2014, 2013, the big pension funds like the Temasek, which is the national pension investment over in Singapore. There's all sorts of ones out of Japan as well. They are set up to invest via state vehicles and the corporations, a large bank, a large fintech. So they're on similar cap tables. So when you see at a macro sense, let's take a WeWork. When a company like WeWork ran into trouble all those years ago, you can believe that folks in Asia also were bitten by that, not just in the United States, places like SoftBank, but other big banks as well. And so I think what you saw is that the capital is interconnected. The benefit of, let's say, Asia, they didn't have a lot of the downturn. They didn't have the history of the .com downturn. Because if you remember when we first started talking about the Asian financial crisis, 1997, 98, they were dealing with their own issues then and luckily missed a lot of the issues related to 2000, 2001, 2002.
Yes.
So what that meant was in 2014s, 15s, folks were just getting set up locally with what is corporate venture capital. So this current cycle for Southeast Asia is the first cycle writ large where they've seen kind of instabilities and downturns in some of the portfolio companies and that sort of a thing. And so that's been, like it always is with corporate VCs, that's been a challenge. And the reason is very simple. Just think about it. Jolene, if you're the CFO of a public company and you've got to do your quarterly financial reports and you're listed on a stock exchange in a foreign country, and you've got a hole in your balance sheet from a VC investment in a startup, doesn't matter where it is, you're going to say, you know what? We should sell it or take our write down or our markdown before the earnings call.
Yes.
So we can get it off our books. Or if it's December and you're on a 12-month financial calendar, you're going to say, you know what? We need to just divest this thing, get it done. So our balance sheet is clean in 2025 or 6 or whatever the year. In Japan, just to give folks an inkling in Japan, Japan's financial years tend to end in March. They're off cycle from America.
Yeah.
So most things in Japan, the educational system, schooling system, financial systems, that stuff is geared to fiscal years being April 1 to March 31st. So if you've got a lot of large Japanese investors on your cap table, they are going to be looking at things a little differently than you might. And so it's a lot of different things to kind of keep in mind here, kind of around the world. But the one thing I'll leave folks with, just that paints a picture of how things are interconnected, but how they're also different. But I will tell you this, the whole world right now that's looking to raise capital, they're all in the Middle East. Everybody is going hat in hand
to Saudi,
to the UAE, the whole UAE. And for folks who may not know, this is a replay of 2007. So folks who have Google Citibank 2007 and then bailout from one of the princes out there. Nothing is new. Nothing is new under the sun.
But it rhymes though, doesn't it?
It does. Yes, it does.
Well, Corey, all right. So we just discussed a lot, and I know that like your time is precious, sir. So we got to bring you back on for a few of them. We got to bring you back on for a few more episodes because this is amazing. But also, here's the cool thing. Corey also has a YouTube channel himself.
Yes.
So Corey, if they want to hear more information from you, because you're going to be cranking out some content on your own, sir. So tell them where they can find you as well.
Okay. So if you see here on screen, you see at Deal Esquire. That's my YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/@dealesquire, you'll see that. So all of my YouTube videos that come out, all that sort of content will be there as well. On Twitter or X, I've got that same handle. And then you can also connect with me for folks professionally on LinkedIn. Same thing, Deal Esquire. You can look me up on LinkedIn as well. And I've got a bunch of different content on different topics, as we've kind of talked about here. Expat related things, business related things, crypto related things, and I'm happy to help. So folks who, if you have questions, make sure to put them in the comments below this video, and we can all, Mark, Jolene, and I can huddle about that and see what we can do.
Perfect. All right. So did you want to leave them with anything else before we sign off?
I say, look, thanks to everyone for your time. Thank you to Mark. Thank you to Jolene. Happy to, meet folks here from the Come Up series. Like I said, I've been to some of the events, but it's a great community you have here. And I think we can all help each other together. So I'll end it with that.
Bet. Well, thank you so much for watching. Y'all, we went overtime. And it's like, it was a pretty dope episode. And I know that a lot of y'all are sitting in the comments like, I got to pawn the replay.
Right.
We had a lot of folks talking about, can you go more time? Look.
We did go overtime, y'all.
We did go overtime. So, but thank you guys for tuning in and watching. We'll have Corey back on the show. But like I said, he has a few YouTube channels. Like I said, if you want to learn everything crypto, you definitely got him over at Digital Corey. If you want to learn everything else, you got Deal Esquire, I think.
Deal Esquire. And we're merging those channels. So you can check me out. Just for people in the comments, you'll see Digital Corey was my first kind of exploration into YouTube and all that. So I've got a number of videos.
He's perfected it now.
Crypto education. It's all crypto education. What is Bitcoin? What is Ethereum? What is a stable coin? And then Deal Esquire is going to have the same content, but we're going to go more into the venture stuff, the startup stuff as well. And you'll see, you'll see me have those crypto videos over time start migrating onto Deal Esquire. So all the new content, just go to dealesquire.com. Deal Esquire at YouTube, not .com.
I was going to say, wait a minute, hold on.
No, don't have that. That was a misspeak. So go to Deal Esquire at YouTube, and you can also connect with me, Deal Esquire at LinkedIn. And thanks everyone for your time. Appreciate it.
All right. Until next time, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Definitely want to hear your comments down below. But until next time, I'm Mark Monroe.
I'm Corey Harris.
And I'm Jillian GC in the place to be.
And this has been your come up. We'll see you guys in the next one.